Welcome back to another top 10 episode on the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. We're going to do these differently now. Is that we normally have myself and Dave or myself and Andy, our general co-host, but now we're going out to the wider audience. And who better today to kickstart the debut of the wider audience than a streaming sensation online whose reactions are brilliant because they are authentic. It's live and in real time. He has got millions of likes on TikTok, hundreds of thousands of followers everywhere he goes. It is Mr. Teshk. How are you?
I don't actually think someone has put me that over ever on any podcast I've ever come on. So Adam, I'm gonna give you bonus points on that one, mate, because that was probably if you want to introduce me every time, I'll take it, mate. No, but I'm good. I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for having me. I don't know how much your followers and viewers are gonna enjoy this list, but I am sticking to my organic self and just going with the stuff that I liked and I enjoyed. So this should be interesting.
It should be interesting. And what you can do is you can clip my intro going forward and then just use it. So then you've got it all the time, then, can't you? So
Sound.
that's what you can do. But before we get to that list, in terms of a storyline, what are
Hmm.
the components that you think that go into making a storyline compelling and watchable?
Personally, like I think it all falls down to which organization is running it. And I predominantly took everything from WWF, WWE slash WCW, because I think over the last 40, 50 years, they have been the ones that have found the perfect mold to be able to bring realism into fantasy. And as long as there's that slight hint of realism, I am locked in. Let me reference just one storyline that we'll probably talk about today is the Bloodline storyline. There's more realism than fantasy in that storyline, but it is one of the longest running storylines of all time. And that's why it's so captivating. The characters are more real than the gimmicks that we used to get in the early 90s, the gobbledygooker, evil dentists, and all kinds of stuff like that. These are just the real people. The realism has to be there. There has to be, it's almost got to take you on a roller coaster. And that's another thing. Like if I don't know what's happening next, I'm happy.
Yeah, no, very true. I also think it's like the characters' chemistry as well, and a
Yeah.
couple of them that I've got into have got it is that chemistry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I'm very much in agreement with you. And it has to have you second guessing, and like during the Attitude Era, like it was like we have to watch Raw, we have to watch the pay-per-views because we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree with that. Like the Attitude Era was one of those ones where you were left on another cliffhanger and you're like, oh man, I don't know if you watched the TV show Heels with Stephen Amell. I don't know if you watched that, but the fact that we have still been left on such a cliffhanger and it's 3 years ago
Yeah.
and I'm still sitting here like, when's the next episode coming? Come on, guys. But that's how it felt in the Attitude Era. It
Yeah.
was always like, okay, I need to get through the next 7 days because I need to know what happens next.
Yeah, exactly that. And that was the beauty. And that still is the beauty to wrestling to this day. But
Yeah.
as you are the guest, I'm going to give you the honor of your number 10 on the wrestling's best storylines for you is.
Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio 2005, the custody of Dominic Mysterio. The debut of Dirty Dominic Mysterio, if you will.
Yeah.
I just think again, and this is going to be a trend through my entire list, the realism that you got between two very good friends.
Yeah.
You brought the outside families into everything, and going down to the culmination to the final match where you have Dom just standing there like in fear in the corner, thinking like, is it actually Eddie that's his pops and is gonna whoop him in the corner? And then you go and you look at the build to everything, the vignettes, like Eddie and Dom at the park talking about, going to get ice cream and, I'm going to teach you things and all these kind of things. And it's just, you look at what dynamics, and it had never been done before. And it really was ahead of its time, I think, for '05 Eddie Guerrero. I believe this was actually Eddie Guerrero's last storyline as well before he passed away. I think this culminated at SummerSlam, and Eddie passed in the November. So just all together, I think this had just perfection and beauty in it. And because there are so many other great storylines with a lot more longevity, that's the only reason it's number 10. But this storyline is still carrying on now because you're really looking at it and you're looking at what Dom has done with his character, 15, 20 years on. And you're like, wait, did they get those DNA results wrong? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love this storyline, man.
I remember it, yeah, and you're right. And obviously, Dom are going to be in a shark cage in a couple of days' time as well. So that should be interesting to see if there's going to be any trend in how he's going to try and sneak out of it or use some form of, I don't know, brass knucks or something.
I think there's a foreign object drop down to live. I think that's the way they might go by it. But that's just great. That's another greasy, slimy thing that Dom probably learned from Eddie in this storyline.
Exactly that. I think it's going to be great. My 10, and it's kind of the same way. They were a friendship. They were feuding before they had this issue. They were feuding as a tag team for many, many years. They had a personal friendship, and this is where I go into storyline based with that reality hit. And it was a very small storyline. Didn't go on too long, but it's Edge and Matt Hardy is my 10. Now, it may go up your list, it may be further, I don't know. But it's that whole point of there was this feud, they were friends, they were tag teams against each other, they put on so many matches. And then when that reality hit, Edge and Lita, or Edge and Amy were out with broken necks at the time, came together, and then they get together. Lita cheats on Matt Hardy, and then he got fired, and everyone was like, why? Yeah. And then you had the thing on Bite This when they were calling up, and you know what I mean? And how that, and then you ended the reality, and then that time on Raw when all of a sudden Edge is like backstage or in the ring and Matt jumps in, and you're like, what is going on? And then and that culminated in many matches. They had the leg drop off the cage. I think it was a Vengeance,
believe it was Vengeance Day or whatever that was,
along those lines. But again, it's just a captivating feud where that line between fiction and reality was crossed, and you were like, well, this is scripted, but, and that's the bit.
how many of those punches are actually landing for once, you know what I mean, type thing? Because I guarantee at least Matt got one or two stiff ones in there, because the frustration is always going to come through. But I actually kept that one off my list because I didn't know if you were going to be okay with controversy and what led to Edge and Lita, and obviously that most interesting segment that we won't talk about on Monday Night Raw. But but yeah, I actually left that one off my list. But it would have probably, if we're going to look at it, it's probably my number 11. So yeah.
I had a couple of notable sort of mentions that I was going to bring up, but yeah, that was that one. But what's your 9?
Mine is one that lasted nearly a decade. And to this day, we still kind of talk about it. And that's the Brothers of Destruction, Undertaker and Kane with Paul Bearer. I got to give Paul Bearer a shout because he was a catalyst to this feud. He was the one that brought Kane in. I believe it was Bad Blood 1997 against Shawn Michaels in Hell in a Cell. So that was one of those ones where you're sitting there, and as a kid, I'm 10 years old at that point, and I'm just watching this monster walk in on this other monster who I've now learned to love, and he's just absolutely victimized by his younger dead brother. And and the other part is, you look at it and it's like, what is Undertaker without Paul Bearer at that point? And this is where they had like the very basic pyro and tech with the lighting, where they had the urn that had the big flashlight in it, and they were zooming it around. I remember that gimmick. And you're like, okay, now that what is the Undertaker going to be now that he no longer has Paul Bearer? And these two went on to have one of the longest and coolest feuds, because you think of the Inferno matches, you think of Hell in a Cell, you think of did they do a Buried Alive? I believe they did a Buried Alive
buried
match.
Him alive when Undertaker went back from sort of biker to, because it was Taker and Vince, and then Kane buried him, and then that led to WrestleMania 20, which was
exactly
of the Undertaker.
So you look at that, and then you also look at the side caveats of it, of Undertaker burying Paul Bearer in cement and just removing Paul Bearer from the equation. Like, there's so many sub stories to this storyline, them being a dominant tag team on SmackDown and just running ruckshot. And then you look at when the draft got implemented and Taker ended up going over to Monday Night Raw from SmackDown. There's so many subcategories to this story that we could just do a video just on this storyline alone. But it's one of those ones now you can learn from this storyline, learn how the characters developed, how they grew and kept reinventing themselves, except for Corporate Kane. Let's not talk about Corporate Kane, but I'm just saying, but they kept reinventing themselves. The story really didn't ever die. And even to this day, like even if you watch them on the Undertaker's podcast, like even then, like they just fall right back into it. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch.
It is. It's higher up my list, so I'll go into my detail about what I thought of it. But yeah, I totally agree with that. And I do remember him and Kane being on the podcast as well, because one of the things that actually hit me on that podcast is when they said to this day, they still get asked if they're brothers. Yeah, and that's, again, the whole point of the story, that breaking that reality to fictional phase is there. So it's higher up my list. So I'll go on to about my bit with them too when I get to it. I'm going really old school with one. Okay. Really old school. And I was I was 5. So obviously at the real time of this feud happening, I wasn't able to watch wrestling at that point because I didn't have it. Obviously over in England, we didn't get it till later on in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Well, actually just at this time, but we never got WCW. So this feud was like a NWA WCW feud, and it was Flair and Steamboat. And if you go back, and I like it because obviously there was that personal rivalry, because it was, Flair, there was like the Flair flamboyance, and Steamboat was the family man, and but it was the pure and obviously I've gone back to watch it since, because at 5 years old I wouldn't be able to appreciate what we appreciate now. But if you go back, and it was like a pure wrestling masterpiece. There was the technical skill with the personal rivalry, with the flamboyance, and Steamboat and Flair in the ring. And it was just absolute magic for me watching.
Yeah, this was one of the last storylines that you could really say fell into the territory era.
Yeah.
Right before Vince decided to tear everything up and kind of make it either up north or you're down south with Billionaire Ted. This was one of the last feuds that you could really say stood the test of time with the territories, and it moved into mainstream, which granted, Steamboat was one of the best wrestlers in the world at the time. Flair was obviously who Ric Flair was, and actually in his mind to who he thinks he still is to this day. But no, these guys were able to be pioneers of what the promo should be, and then what a technical masterpiece in the ring should be as well. The only other feuds that you can really go back to is like the Von Erichs with Harley Race back in the day, but those ones were ahead of their time as well. But this one is, I think this is a great shout to actually be on this list, because I don't know if a lot of people, especially this day and age, I feel that you and I are both a little older than we want to put on, but this is one of those ones that people need to go back and watch and really understand, because again, if you're an up and coming wrestler, you need to educate yourself on how to do it. And this is one way to watch it.
Yeah, definitely so. I loved it. I thought it was great. Going back and watching it was brilliant for me, just to get a real glimpse of what it was like back then. I've listened to people like Cornette and tell you about it, but it's nice to be able to physically actually appreciate it now. And I don't mind. I'm 40, so I can, going back way back when, it was nice now, so I can appreciate it more now than what I would have done as a 5-year-old kid watching that feud.
Yeah, so I would have been 2.
So there you go. There we go. So it's appreciated more now. But what is your number 8?
CM Punk versus the McMahons, 10 and 11. Okay. This is obviously the feud with the notorious pipe bomb and the frustrations of CM Punk, and obviously him believing that he was a main eventer, and about his contract about to run out.
Yeah.
And him about to, win the WWE championship and leave and be out of contract. This is one where it was very unique for the time period of professional wrestling.
Yeah.
Because let's be real, this was not a good time in professional wrestling. This was actually where I stopped watching professional wrestling. Yeah. I stopped watching for about 3 years. I came back. Actually, I think I came back in 11, 12. But this is where I really got that like little whisper in my ear saying, hey, this guy is cutting these promos and really going at the McMahons. It's kind of Austin-like. And I'm like, okay, I'll deviate back. And watching that feud, he was taking a lot from a lot of people. Yeah. With his character at that point. He was taking a lot of Shawn. He was taking a lot of Austin. He was taking a lot of Flair. He was taking a lot of Savage. You know, he was pulling from everybody and really developing his character. And to be honest, I feel it did take another about 7 or 8 years for CM Punk to finally lock into who he was. Yeah. So back at this time in 10 and 11, especially with him going at Vince and going at Hunter, I don't think Punk was ready at this time, but they had to. He was the one making all the noise and drawing the money. And the one thing they always said is if you draw money, you're going to get put at the top of the show. So I looked at this as a feud 10 years too early, but it was still a very good feud and people still talk about it to this day.
Yeah, definitely. So again, it's a bit further up my list, but yes, it's definitely on there. And I think I remember Paul Heyman was doing so we have a show here called like Inside the Ropes, and they bring people over. And Paul Heyman, you mentioned one of those lines because he was before he cut the promo on Vince before Invasion, and it was that really big shoot promo, and then Vince was like, "I don't care, just draw me money. You know, you can say what you want." And exactly right, what you're saying there. Punk was drawing money, so to WWE it was fine, you know. And
I've actually watched that Inside the Ropes live interview probably 15, 20 times. Well, I love that's one of my favorite interviews.
One of my co-hosts, Fiona, who does NWA with me, she works for Inside the Ropes. So it was like, nice. She's the one that managed to get one of my guests that I'll talk about at the end to come back. So we've had him on twice. We've got him on 3 times, but I'll talk about that at the end. I'll go into my number 8, and my number 8 was it was a road to, like, I don't know, it was a road to WrestleMania really in the character sense, but it was Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson's road to WrestleMania 30. And again, 2013, 2014, I don't still think it was the greatest of wrestling times in terms of what was going on in wrestling. And you know, you had the authority. They tried to kind of bring back in a different way, though, the authorities figure of like a Vince McMahon, but this time it was Triple H, Stephanie, and Randy Orton, Batista, and everyone else. And it was Daniel Bryan that was the although he wasn't the anti-hero that Stone Cold was, he was the hero that everybody wants. And that whole the way he got probably one of the first times they actually changed things due to crowd reaction.
Yes.
Which is, you know, the whole crowd yesing and wanting Bryan Danielson or Daniel Bryan to do it and get it forward. And then that moment when it happens at WrestleMania, finally, and he still has to jump through hoops. He has to start the show against Hunter and finish against Randy and Batista. So he has to jump through hoops. And then you have the bit in between, which I will talk about, that other big thing that happened at that pay-per-view, which is on my actually next on my list that we'll talk about, that, you know, you have to then bring the crowd from that downer, because it was a huge downer for a lot of people, and that to bring it right back up and to end it with the Miracle on Bourbon Street. I think Michael.
Yeah, Miracle on Bourbon Street, WrestleMania 30.
When Daniel Bryan wins, it was just such a special moment, and it just deserves to be on the list just because of, you know, how it all happened. And obviously you had the thing with is it Crusher? Was it the kid Connor Crusher? Was it the
Connor the Crusher? Yeah,
Connor the Crusher as well. He was there to see that happen as well, and that moment was just perfect for me.
Yeah. So this is where the followers are going to look at me differently, but I'm staying true to myself. I've never been a fan of the face. I am not a big fan of the yay, rah, 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 go me, underdog storyline, except for one storyline, which is higher up on my list. But it's just never been for me. Along with Kofi Mania and Danielson, I was like, okay, cool. Now what? And that's the way I look at those things. The same way I'm looking at Cody right now and finishing the story. It's like, oh, you finished the story. Now what?
Yeah.
And it's proving to bring out the questions now. I don't mean to deviate away from what we're talking about, but it's proving it, because you look at the 4 feuds he's had since Roman was gone, and you're like,
nothing.
So and that was the same with Danielson. For me, it was awesome. Good for you. You deserve it. But Now tell me what's next
Yeah.
and make me believe why everyone's behind you. And it kind of did, but it kind of didn't. That's how I felt about it.
Exactly that, and you're exactly right, Cody. I've been saying it on well, when I've been reviewing SmackDown and everything. There has been no substance, and it also feels like he's was forgotten about because of you mentioned the bloodline stuff that's still going on. And I always find it also difficult on SmackDown right now because if you're not Cody and you're not the bloodline, there's really nothing for you on SmackDown at the minute. That's my opinion on it. I don't know, but that's
Uh, Next to Mello and Andrade, you
yeah,
almost forget that LA Knight's even US champion.
exactly that. You do, and
So,
that's a shame. That's a
yeah.
shame for me. But number 7 on your list.
The rise and fall of Evolution, 2003 to 2005. I think Evolution again. Yeah, I had this conversation with one of your previous guests and a very good friend of mine, Con Man,
Mm,
that there are certain factions that are staples to what a faction should be.
yeah,
The Horsemen, you look at DX, you look at the NWO, the original NWO,
yeah,
and then you look at Evolution, and then you look at the Shield.
yeah,
These are cookie cutter factions for the day and age that we live in at that time. And Evolution was that almost cookie cutter from what the Horsemen were. You know, you had Flair, you had Triple H, the man basically running the show. You had Batista, the brute up and comer, brute force that you knew was always going to be champion.
yeah,
And then you had Randy Orton, who is a young, good looking third generation superstar that the world was going to get put on very quickly. And it did. And the way they built the faction and the way they made it crumble, especially with that first little, well, no, the first major chink in the armor with the
yeah,
thumbs down. Honestly, that I wish we could have gotten a final way of making it like, I know we did get Batista Hunter,
mm,
but I don't feel it hit right.
no,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
I
yeah,
think back then it would have hit better, but it is what it is. But I just think imagine having a separation of the Horsemen
yeah,
back then, back in the day, that this way, the way they did this, it would send a meltdown in the 80s for
yeah,
people having to read the dirt sheets and the newspapers and the magazines. It would draw major money. And this is what Evolution was able to do. And look what they created. Multiple time WWE World Heavyweight Champions and WWE Champions. I arguably think Randy Orton's more deserving than anyone to break Flair's streak at this point.
yeah,
It's just what they developed out of this faction. Maybe the storyline wasn't as good as it could have been, but what came from that storyline is greatness.
yeah. Certainly is. Also, one of the best entrance musics ever. I love it.
Jeez.
That was
Amazing.
love that.
What was it? What was it? Line in the sand?
Line in the Sand from Motorhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Love that music. Interesting though, but you're pointing out if they had gone with the original members of the Evolution, because obviously Batista come in late. It was meant to be Jindrak from WCW. It was meant to be.
So if you actually watched Chris Van Vliet's interview
Yeah.
with Batista recently,
Mhm.
Batista squashed that.
Did it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Funny. I didn't know. No, I haven't seen that one.
So Batista squashed that, and it was originally Batista, but
Right.
he was out with an injury. So they brought Jindrak in just to film the vignettes
Oh,
to
I
see
see.
how he would look just in case. But it
Got
was
it.
actually always Batista.
Oh wow, no, I haven't got around to seeing that interview yet, so I'll have to watch that. So that's an interesting one. So yeah, I always because even Jindrak had commented, even Randy might have commented on Jindrak
Yeah.
potentially coming in, but obviously, but I did hear that Batista was out injured, but I always thought Jindrak was going to slot in. I didn't know it was just brought for the purpose of making it.
Yeah, so it was like that just in case type of thing. And I know Jindrak has said what he
Yeah.
believed, and Orton has kind of deviated that way. But I think Batista, though, I watched it and he just put it across. And he's just like, nah, man, it was me. It was always me. So
Wow, interesting. That's actually quite interesting. I never knew that. 7 on my list, and we just spoke about it. Well, I kind of spoke about it in the Danielson thing. The streak for me, it was an incredible thing, and obviously, again, when it started back, and obviously when Undertaker started in '91 and he first come out, he thought he was going to be Eggman, like he said and so many times at Survivor Series. To have that sort of, when he cut, I just remember him coming out initially. And then obviously the Mania wins start picking up, and you don't really notice. I don't think you notice it until they make a big deal out of it. And when the
Yep.
WWE started to make a big deal out of it, and you look at the list of names that he'd gone on to go and he beat. And I think after WrestleMania 30, for me, WrestleMania has never been the same because there isn't that mystique. And I think it's lost. I don't know even if it's a two-night thing that's done it as well, but there isn't the mystique from me that was there. It was like, who's got, it was like every year, right? Who's Undertaker got? Who's, that was kind of
Yep.
one of the first things on my list was who's Undertaker going against? Who's he going against? And when he lost it, even though he come back the next year and beat Bray Wyatt, for me, it's just never been the same. And I've always loved, you go back through and you're like, WrestleMania 21, the first WrestleMania that I went to with Randy Orton. And you look back now and you think, wow, Randy could have done it, but he just
Yep.
wasn't ready. And maturity, he wasn't ready. And he even said that. Edge turned it down,
Yep.
apparently, with the WrestleMania. Batista had an opportunity as well. And even Shawn Michaels, those clinics that he put on, the clinics with Hunter, perhaps it could have ended at 28 in the Hell in the Cell. May have been a more
Yep.
fitting way in terms
Yep.
of story, end of an era, could have done it that way. For Brock to do it, I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily agree with it. I understand why, but I just feel like I would rather have him retire or had him and Kane just destroy each other or something like that. And, back then, but the streak for me was just an amazing thing. And I absolutely loved the streak. I'm so sad it's not there.
Yeah, it's definitely slightly higher up on my list, so
Yeah.
I'll speak to that a little bit more when we get to it. But I will say I'm not going to be dramatic about it and I still have nightmares about it, but it's still one of those ones. It's almost like a dirty word to talk about the ending of the streak. It's just like leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And growing up, being that Undertaker was actually the first live main event I ever saw.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was Undertaker versus Sid Vicious in a house show. And I was front row. And yeah, we'll talk about it more when I get to it. But yeah, that's the streak's something different, man. Number 6, right?
Yeah, number 6 for you. Yes, go.
Triple H and Stephanie McMahon Helmsley and the entire storyline that saved WWE from having a massive amount of egg on their face. I don't want to reference the documentary too much, but I learned something that just the other day that they had no plan after Test and Stephanie got married.
Wow.
And if it was thanks to Hunter giving the idea, saying, hey, I rocked up into the bachelorette party and spiked her drink, and they led us down this glorious storyline of Stephanie really coming into her own, the McMahon Helmsley era, if it's not for Triple H and Stephanie McMahon and that little tidbit with that marriage from Test, we don't get the McMahon Helmsley era. We don't get the authority. We don't get the corporation. We might not get Triple H in the position he's in now.
Yeah.
Like, we don't get any of that. So just because some of that story was horrible.
Yeah.
But some of that story was horrible. Like Stephanie winning the women's championship in her first match. Like, come on. Like, let's be real. But you look at it all and you're like, if it's not for that one idea and a really bad storyline leading into it, we might not be in the situation we're in professional wrestling today.
Yeah.
That's why it's on my list.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is really, that is a really important storyline, I think. And I think it's the storyline that doesn't perhaps get the recognition that you've just given it. And how the importance actually of what that storyline meant towards, as you say, other things that have gone on alongside it. So that is a very important one. And I still remember that time, and I still remember that infamous night on Raw where you see Triple H and she's in the car and he's talking about, it was incredible moment. But yeah, so much other stuff happened from that, which is incredible. It actually goes on to my 6, and it may be further up your list, but this is when it gets really weird. This is the Montreal Screwjob, but more importantly, Brett and Shawn. Maybe up further your list, I don't know.
It's actually not there.
It's not there. Okay.
It's not there. And it's not, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's not because I don't believe it needs to be there. But when we talk storylines, I talk more of the longevity of what it could have led to.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, it should be on my list, but go ahead. And yeah, go ahead.
It is a storyline that obviously for so many reasons it goes from they had this bit, they had this the mutual respect, they had everything. Sean was Sean, as as everyone knows what Sean was like back then. And he refused to said he was never going to put Brett over at Survivor Series again. If you believe stuff that's going on, Brett wouldn't lose to him in Canada. They had a locker room fight as well. There's a lot of stuff that you read that you have to go into, and it was just a moment which I don't know, because Brett was going to WCW. They already had the Alundra Blaze put the women's title in the bin.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we'll ever know who said the idea, because everyone has come out. I think Triple H said he said it in a documentary. I heard Cornette say it on a shoe. I think so. Anyway, we don't actually know who said or who come up with the idea for sure. But somebody come up with the idea of screwing Brett out of the title because they couldn't risk Brett turning up at WCW with the WWE champion or WF championship at the time and putting it in the bin. So they decided to screw Brett out of that match as Sean was putting him in the sharpshooter. They rung the bell. And from there, again, you these what ifs, and we always say about what ifs. Well, what if it didn't happen? What would have happened if they had done this we'll say the right way, but if Brett had come out the next night and handed the title over like he said he was going to do?
We don't get Mr. McMahon.
We don't get, again, one of my other storylines above it. We don't get probably the best storyline one of the best storylines that wrestling's ever created. Yeah. Do we even get, and I've got to be very careful of the wording here. Does things happen with Owen that maybe didn't happen or did happen back when? Do we go there? Does that happen? Does Brett even come back earlier because of how he was treated in WCW? And then those things happen. Yeah, it's all of those separate subplots that make that Screwjob, not even just the Brett Sean feud in general, and you just got the final now, and it took so many years. Obviously Brett had the stroke with Goldberg and Vince was at the hospital at the time, and it was like they kind of made amends with Sean on Raw live in front of everyone the day that TNA went live on the Monday night, and that whole thing, and there's just so many subplots that could have happened, but after that.
Very much so. Again, it's another conversation that we could do a whole other podcast on. Is just the Montreal Screwjob and the waterfall effect that it was. I've never really thought of the Owen situation before. That's a first one that's really triggered. I'm gonna have to think that back later. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That is one of those ones where you're like, what if?
Yeah,
what if?
Exactly that.
So.
Halfway through 5.
My number 5. We're running it back. I think we're finally overlapping on one, and we're going to the streak. You've spoken about it quite well, and I'm just going to add a little bit to it. It's that I loved the idea of WrestleMania, even when the Undertaker was starting to slow down, and you always knew in January or maybe just after the Rumble.
Yeah,
that bell was going to toll on Monday Night Raw or SmackDown. And that was my road to WrestleMania moment, is everyone says, oh, whoever wins the Rumble, it's the road to WrestleMania. No, the road to WrestleMania for me was when that bell tolled. And you're like, all right, who's the next victim? And going into 30, it was weird because just that whole story building into it, you felt like, is Brock and Heyman too powerful? It's almost like you put Heyman next to someone and it's just like, it could happen.
Yeah. And
then obviously what happened. And I personally don't agree with it. And I've said this to people at WWE that it was one of the dumbest decisions they've ever made. But I will say that I don't think Brock deserved it or needed it. I think Edge turning it down was a good idea.
Yeah.
I personally think it should have been Bray.
Okay. Interesting.
Or at a long shot, it should have been Roman.
Okay. Yeah.
But for me, I was happy when he wrapped up his coat, put his hat in the middle of the ring and walked out.
Yeah.
I was happy with that.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if I don't know if I wanted anyone to do it. I think I would have rather him just, you know, maybe
Sailed off into the sunset.
yeah, maybe even have a couple of years when he didn't do it and then just annihilate Cena like he did, just to kind of cap it off. I don't know. I don't know. But just send him, that was his thing. He wasn't like a 16-time world champion. He didn't have, he had WrestleMania was him. That was
Yeah.
it. And to
Yep.
take that away from him, I don't know. I didn't think that was fine. My five, and we go way back again. We're going back to 1989. We're going back to when the Mega Powers exploded and Hogan and Savage. It was crazy. It was a real slow burn as well. Some of this sometimes, they don't have to jump into it quite quick. I always think that sometimes with storylines they just jump straight in, whether they should need to just pull it back and rein it in.
Yeah.
This took a while, and it was the jealousy over Miss Elizabeth, and the match when Hogan took her out, and it all just kicked off between them both, and then
Yeah.
obviously their match at WrestleMania was the culmination of pretty much a storyline that was like nearly 2 years, really, when you think about it, and it was just so cool. And then obviously when you look at it when they go back to WCW, and then there's a real beef again between them, and whether that beef was ever squashed, Hogan says it was, but Hogan also said Andre weighed 800 pounds at the time that he slammed him. So you kind of have to, you don't know, but nevertheless, that feud in 1989 was just, again, going back and watching it and having so much more appreciation for the storytelling in it was incredible for me.
Yeah, and it was one of those storylines that was ahead of its day, that's for sure. But the other part is, and like I've mentioned about a lot of the storylines that I have on my list, there's a bunch of realism to it. Like Randy was that jealous person. Even his brother Lanny came out shortly after he passed away talking about his relationship with Elizabeth. And that was Randy. He was, that emotional, like, that's my woman and you don't touch type thing. And unfortunately, that's what the day and age back then was in the 80s and the 70s, where, men looked at it differently and women looked at things differently. But when you look at them bringing it onto television, that's got to be difficult. It's kind of like the Matt and Lita thing again, where, you don't really know where the lines are blurred. It's that gray sweet spot.
Yeah.
And they did a really good job. I remember that locker room segment where Hogan's in there checking on Elizabeth, and Randy comes in just losing his mind, and like he grabs Hogan's arm and like throws it off, and you're like, whoa, hold on a second. Are we on camera, or are we supposed to be on camera? So that it's another storyline that was ahead of its time. And I do think a lot of storylines nowadays, especially when there's the two guys and the female involved, take a lot from that storyline. Yeah. So it's kind of funny where realism turns into fiction again, and where WWE's learned, and WCW, TNA, NWA, all these places have learned, and now they just utilize it's rinse and repeat almost.
It is, yeah. I'm just have to mention, you mentioned the bloodline. I haven't put it on my list for a reason, because it's still going on. So I've left it off my list just because it's still. You can put it on. I'm saying you can put it on yours.
Oh, mine's there. It's
yeah, there. No, yeah. I've just left it off because it's still ongoing for me. That's the
reason. There is a reason mine is on though.
Okay, fine, perfect. So you got your
there's more of just being like, oh, it's so good, I'm just over on it right now. Yeah. It's there for a reason.
Perfect.
All right, so number 4, right?
Yes.
All right, I'm jumping out of WWE for once. And we're going over to WCW, and we are going with the Outsiders / the Third Man, the build into the New World Order.
Yeah.
This had never been done.
No.
Ever. Bischoff was a revolutionary in terms of this storyline.
Yeah.
And the fact that you actually were forced to change the channel because you're thinking as a kid or as a teen or young teen that WWE guys are also on WCW television.
Yeah.
I'm confused. I need to know why. And the fact that we got those couple of months until WWE decided to pull the lawsuit and say, hey, you need to identify who these guys are.
Yeah.
Hell, that was one of the coolest couple of months in professional wrestling history, where you're sitting there and you're like, I don't know what to believe anymore.
Yeah.
So And arguably, without this storyline, we don't get the 83 weeks.
Yeah.
We don't get the Monday Night Wars. We potentially don't get some of the stuff that we saw with like Mick Foley, The Rock, The Nation, Austin, Taker, the ministry. I think the ministry was just before that. My bad. But like you get all of these things and you're like, whoa, WWE is literally throwing an arsenal at WCW because they are the better product and you knew they were always going to win, but it did take quite some time for them to, put everything over. So I think this when it comes to relative importance in wrestling history, this might be the most important storyline in wrestling history.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's one above your one. So mine's third. So I'll get into my view of that in a minute. My fourth one, you have already mentioned, say we're crossing over, which we're always going to do at this point. It was the CM Punk pipe bomb and that whole Punk versus the authority or Punk versus the McMahons or Triple H. But again, there was loads of these things about lines being crossed. That pipe bomb when he first hit it, I was sitting there going, "Wow, hold on a minute here. Is Raw? You kind of mentioned it. Is Raw still on the air? Are we still live? What is he going on?" He's mentioned. And he went on to like mention Triple H by Paul, which we do. Now it's Paul or Paul Triple H, but he was mentioning Paul. He mentioned guys that were released and were saying, "Oh, have you spoke to Harry Smith? How did you fire him? How did you fire Chris Masters?" And you're sitting there going, "Whoa, he's like, And it was one of them ones where he was backstage. I think it was SummerSlam before his match, and Steph put her hand out to shake Punk's hand. He was like, "I would, but I know where it's been." And but it was that whole element of realism, and I do agree with you. I do think it was 10 years too early for that storyline because I think it would have worked better. And what I would say in closing on this, because obviously Punk's had issues at AEW and everything, and I saw the video that aired today before I watched NXT with Punk wearing those, hot pant things that Michaels wears with a thing. I would say right now that Punk is having so much fun, and it's so much nice to see Punk looking like he's enjoying himself and having a really good time in WWE. And I think I never thought I'd see it again, but I'm just happy that he seems to be enjoying what he's doing right now.
Well, the fact that even I cannot remember the interview that Sean did. It was recently, the last 48 hours, maybe 72 hours. But Sean has said that Punk will be his successor in NXT. Mm-hmm. So to think about 2010, 2011 anti-corporation Punk, to now you're potentially the next person to help develop a multi-billion-dollar corporation's new talent.
Yeah.
Then again, we're also watching the degenerates run the asylum right now with Triple H and Shawn Michaels, right? Yeah. Which we never thought we would get. No. But the fact that Punk has turned everything around to that horrible person that we heard everything about at AEW to now literally on his own dime flying down to Orlando just to help train the kids.
Yeah.
I love it. This is the version. This is what the divide between realism as a on-screen performer, that savage face that's going against Drew McIntyre at Bad Blood. Yeah. And then you switch it over to, these girls looking up to Punk like he's, a family man, the dad of, the new kids. Yeah. And I love that. I love that for Punk. I think it's so positive, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he's able to do.
And I'm looking for him and Drew have had a great. I think Drew's done his best work ever in this.
I have said this so many times. You've probably seen one of my videos, but I will say it again because I will stand on it. October of 2023, I said Drew McIntyre is going to be the best heel in professional wrestling through 2024, and he'll do the best work of his life. It will be close to 09 Randy Orton, and I don't think we can get much closer to what Drew's promos have been compared to some of the heel work that Randy did in 09. Yeah. I think Drew is a staple heel in the business, and I'm so glad that we re-signed him, because if we had lost them, I don't know if I don't know what I would have done.
It would have been interesting to see what would have happened for sure. Top 3 now. What is your 3?
This is a one out of like left field, as we say, but Eddie Guerrero's redemption 02 to 04.
Oh man, yeah.
Reason being, I don't know if you know the story, but I hold Eddie Guerrero in very high regard. If it wasn't for Eddie Guerrero, I would probably not be sitting here having this conversation with you, because a conversation with Eddie Guerrero literally saved my life.
Wow.
And this was 2003.
Okay.
So Eddie Guerrero's redemption, coming back from everything that he did and being able to change his life around, and then his addiction promo against Brock Lesnar going into, it was No Way Out, right?
Oh yeah, when he won the title, yeah.
Going into No Way Out. Everything about that 2 years of Eddie Guerrero spoke to anyone that is struggling.
Yeah.
And he literally lived basically like an open book on television. He struggled and he brought himself back around. And I think for anyone that wants to, I don't want this to be like a speech of, go find your happy place. But if you want to find a way to like fight through it, this entire 2 year storyline is probably one of the best ways to do it. Eddie's redemption from, doing the stupid shit that he was doing outside. And we come back to blurring the lines of reality and fiction. And Eddie did an amazing job. And especially to do it against the young Thundercat that was Brock Lesnar, and the pops that Eddie was getting and the fun that it looked like Eddie was having. Oh man, that storyline is fantastic. Actually, didn't he have a minor storyline against John Cena that culminated with a parking lot brawl?
Yes, he did.
Which I'm pretty sure next to Gold Dust and Roddy Piper might be one of the best parking lot brawls I've ever seen on major television. So yeah, just everything. Like there's so many things you can pick from those 2 years that were just fantastic by Eddie. So
yeah, that was amazing. Just a quick one on Eddie before we go. I touched down at WrestleMania 21 in LA, checked into my hotel, was at Denny's. I had a Jason Denny's. We realized that Eddie was doing a signing at Toys R Us a bit further down the line. We got there, we took a taxi there, and it was limited to 500. And we were 497, 498, 499, and 500 in the queue. So we were the last four, which were five. We got to the signing between 6 and 8. We was just into the door at 8 o'clock, and they had to ask Eddie if he was okay to finish off the last line. When she goes to ask him, he gets on the table, he does his dance. He's like, "We're going on now, that's it." It was just incredible at 21, I was 20, 21 years old at that point. But to feel it for the first time, you're there for my first WrestleMania. I'd been to like SummerSlam and stuff in the UK and stuff like that. But first time you were there to meet him and for him to do that was just,
well, when we're done, I'll tell you the rest of the story. When we're offline, I'll tell you the rest of the story. But that's it. Eddie was just a very special person.
Oh, amazing. He was for us as well. That will always live down in my memory for that, for sure. Three, I've said it was one below yours was the New World. Mine was like the New World Order, but it started with Hall and Nash. And one of our guests, and I can tell you now because of my good colleague at Inside the Ropes, Fiona, we've had Eric Bischoff on twice, and we've got him coming back on. We're recording with him next week. And the whole thing with that, and I remember because obviously in England at the time, so it used to be the Friday Night Wars for us. So it used to be on a Friday, Raw and WCW. We used to have so Johnny Bravo used to finish on the Cartoon Network, and we would have Nitro start for an hour, and then an hour later Raw would start. So we had the hour in between, and then Raw would finish an hour later. So I would always watch the first hour of Nitro, and I will never forget that night when watching the match on Nitro, and Scott Hall starts walking down the stairs, and I'm thinking, what on earth is he doing? I was Razor Ramon, WCW, what's going on? And he was like, that line, you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. You want a war, you've got it. Yeah, exactly. And then a couple, and then they talk about the next guy, the big man's coming, and you're like, who's that about? And then you see Nash behind Bischoff on Nitro, and you're like, oh my God, Nash is now, Diesel's now on WCW. And then they talk about the third man, and Eric Bischoff on Inside the Ropes told us the story, because I went to the show. That was when they surprised me. Eric told me that he was coming on for the first time, the podcast.
Yeah.
That was a moment I'll tell you off air about. But he was saying about Hogan was in LA and he called Bischoff. He was filming and he called Bischoff. Bischoff had to go fly out there because they were going to do Sting. And Sting, well, Sting was going to be there. And then Hogan said, "No, I want to be the third man." And obviously, when that happens at Bash at the Beach, it just changes everything. And I mean literally everything at that time. The greatest face in the professional wrestling had been heel before if you'd done your homework. But at that time,
If you go back to like
yeah,
84, 83 or whatever it was, yeah.
exactly. Biggest face in wrestling turns heel. Boom. And you now see Hollywood Hogan and everything that happened after that, as you've already mentioned, DX Nation, the corporate ministry, maybe
Yeah.
there. And you see on the edgier stuff that WWE start really all started because of what happened with the NWO. So for me, if that doesn't happen, I don't know. I don't necessarily know if WWE would ever win the wars. I don't know, but it just plays an important part in wrestling history.
No, you're absolutely right, and I should have put it as just the entire NWO segment, but and the third man, but like it's kind of funny. January I was at the Royal Rumble with Jacob and Zilla, and we we were at Hogan's place in Clearwater at the restaurant, and Hogan was doing a signing, and we like bull rushed the signing in front of like 500 people. And we just walked through security, and Hogan started telling us stories because obviously he knows Alpha, Sika, and the Wild Samoans, and he used to roll with them. And Hogan, and I quote, and I have it on video. Hogan goes, "I was always the third man, and I was always the honorary Oos." And I was like, "What am I recording right now?" One of the coolest lines I've ever heard Hogan say, and it was in like a private like little thing. So
interesting.
Number two.
Speaking
of the Fatus, number two greatest storyline of all time is the Bloodline. I acknowledge my true tribal chief, the OTC Roman Reigns, but I also acknowledge the original tribal chief, as in Umaga, and original tribal chief in the High Chief Peter Maivia.
Yeah.
The reason this is on my list, and we discussed this earlier about why you kept it off, the Bloodline storyline is the longest running storyline in professional wrestling.
It is, yeah.
It goes back to the 70s. It goes back to Vince McMahon Sr. If it wasn't for the High Chief Peter Maivia, the island of Samoa might not actually be talked about in professional wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, he might have not shown his successors how to get into the business. We might not get Soul Man Rocky Johnson meeting his wife.
Yeah.
And giving birth to one of the greatest talents in professional wrestling history in Dwayne The Rock Johnson. We might not get Rikishi running over Stone Cold Steve Austin. "I did it for The Rock." And then you get that face off between Rock and Rikishi where Rock says, "I don't care, and I'm just going to rock bottom you through the ring." And we get that feud. We don't get the Usos. We don't get Umaga. We don't get Rosie. We don't get any of those guys. And then we don't get Roman Reigns. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't get where we are now with a 3.5 year storyline that could potentially go another 10 if they do it right.
Yeah.
Which they have been.
Yeah.
So the reason this Bloodline storyline is so important because it has captivated audiences technically for over 65, 70 years.
Yeah.
So it's almost a century old if you look at it.
Yeah.
So yes, we're getting the cream of the crop, as Macho Man would say, at the top right now. But look who else we got coming. We got Lance. We got Hikuleo. We have the potential of Zilla. We've seen Jacob come in, and we've wanted Jacob for over 14 years almost. Jacob's 10 years too late in my mind. He should have been there 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing now is all different little dynamics out of this one feud, and it can go anywhere.
Yeah.
That Bloodline feud could fall into GCW.
Yeah.
We've seen what was going on with Zilla, throwing the ones up, Jacob and him killing it as a tag team, that kind of thing. So the Bloodline storyline right now it could surpass my number one. Not yet, because the number one is the most important storyline, which changed everything. But the Bloodline storyline is arguably the longest and coolest storyline of all time.
It is, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping that the OTB, the original Bloodline, get back together maybe as we move towards Survivor Series, hopefully, as a certain War Games is due. Uh, so hopefully, anyway. My number two, you have covered off. It was lower down your list. I'm Undertaker and Kane.
Yep.
And again, the whole thing about the reality and oh my God, the Undertaker has a brother for a start, and Paul Bearer turning his back on the Undertaker as well. And you were like, wow, hold on, he's burned his house down. He's got this brother that we don't know about. And you're right, at the time where the pyro wasn't a big thing, you had the lights go out when Taker was going to finish Shawn off, the pyro hits, the music, and this mammoth monster just walks down. And I was 13, I think. Something like that when it happened, and I was still
97. So I was 10, 13, so you would have been 13.
Yeah. And I was like, wow. I was kind of scared of him at the time because he had the Michael Myers look and the mask,
Yep.
and then as you say, they started shooting things across the air, setting caskets on fire, and buried alive Inferno matches, and even to like when he put the Undertaker in a vegetated state those years ago on SmackDown, when he was blaming Rey Mysterio, if you remember, and they went on another match. So that was still going on, and obviously they had the times when the Brothers of Destruction first got together, where Kane's doing his pose at the Raw, Undertaker's doing the eye roll to end Raw all those years ago, only for Kane to, I think it was him, Yokozuna, there was loads of them put him in a casket, and that was when the casket got set on fire.
Yeah.
But yeah, just an incredible feud that went over decades, really, a bit like what you was hinting at with the Bloodline, and two that were just incredible. And I was kind of hoping that they would end up finishing each other, really, that in terms of careers, they would have this big blow off and they would both, I don't know, destroy each other somehow. But Taker and Kane was amazing. And I grew up with that, which was fantastic. And maybe our number ones may be the same. So
I'm gonna if it's not, I'm just gonna jump off this call now. Number one, it's Austin McMahon.
Yes, it is.
It's Austin McMahon.
Yeah.
It is a storyline that even today, they could just show up on camera, which we're probably never going to see again. But they could show up on camera and you'd be like, all right, how many beers are going to get drank and how bad is Vince about to get whooped? You know what I mean? And just the storyline itself will stand the test of time because it's how every person that works for a 9 to 5 feels.
Yeah.
At least once or twice a week, maybe more. You just want to smash your boss in the face once in a while and just tell him to go himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can talk about Austin McMahon all day. This was my first shirt as a wrestling fan, was an Austin 316 shirt. Yeah. And I still have it. It's actually hanging in the closet back there. Brilliant. And because they didn't sell kid sizes back then, they only sold men's smalls.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, Austin McMahon, hands down, it's the most important storyline. If without Austin McMahon, WWE doesn't win the Monday Night Wars.
Exactly that, and this is my number one for that same reason as well. And you talk about shirts, it was the shirt that got me suspended from school. I had a shirt and it had Austin 316, it had the skull, and the skull was doing that. And I thought, why not wear it to a non-uniform day at school? Didn't last.
Lovely.
At school, I
didn't think so.
But an incredible feud, and as you say, without that feud, Eric Bischoff is the winner of the Monday Night Raws, and we have a whole new, again, a kind of what if moment in wrestling that we never have to worry about. But yeah, Austin McMahon, number one for both of us, which I'm kind of glad. I was hoping, I wasn't sure if it was going to be Bloodline, but I get why it's not, and I get why you put it at 2. So that's an interesting one. But
it's one of those ones. Bloodline, like I argue with Santi, I argue with Khan about Bloodline, and I'm like, guys, it's not over yet.
No,
like let it end. And when it ends, then we can compare Austin McMahon to the Bloodline.
Yeah.
But until then, Austin McMahon has technically finished. Yeah. And Austin is still the number 1 merch seller in professional wrestling right now.
Yeah.
And he will be, because like, if you look at it, every single city they go to, they have a new 316 shirt. You know what I mean? So Austin, for the short run he had, and I hate to say it, Austin was only around, let's say 10 years.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But it was the most important 10 years in professional wrestling.
Definitely, without a doubt. with
So
an absolute doubt. Well, that's our top tens. But tell everybody, I mean, I love your guys' stuff. I've said I've had Con Man on before. He was great. He's going to come and do a top 10 with us soon as well. It's so great to watch you guys do it. And it's very that you guys have been doing this for so long. And I feel like I'm not saying you didn't get your recognition before, but to see you guys at the WWE events talking with talking with the guys, it kind of inspires people like me who've been doing this for 2 years that are really at the bottom rung when you guys are really up here and doing what you do. It's so great to see. But where can people watch you and watch your magic unfold live?
on all platforms, Twitch, YouTube, over on Instagram, TikTok, everything is Mr Teshk except for Instagram. It's Mr Teshk. But yeah, it's kind of funny you say that you've been doing it 2 years. If you think about it, I've only been doing it 3.5.
Yeah.
I've only been doing it 3.5. I've just found a way to, I guess I'm just a mark, and being a mark in front of WWE's eyes is, it gets you in the WrestleMania documentary. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's so funny. I don't mean to extend this too long, but, I did a Q&A on my Instagram the other day, and somebody goes, since becoming a content creator, what's the most special moment in your life, or in your career? And I was like, well, being in the WrestleMania doc. And then I was like, and maybe having my face plastered all over the Barclays Center without knowing it. Cause like, if you go back to the Monday Night Raw, I believe it was, they did the clip of Wheezy than myself losing, but it froze in the stadium. So like, I had a bunch of people tweet me like, dude, your face is frozen in the Barclays Center. So, but yeah, all social media platforms. I appreciate like anyone who likes, subscribes, all that kind of stuff. We're doing a lot more consistent content, and yeah, it's gonna be fun. And then we also have the Straight Shoot channel as well. So
yeah, indeed, go out and watch it. It is awesome. I love watching the clip. I think I love it because I like watching the clips that you guys post up. Obviously, watching it live is difficult over here in the UK. It's 2-3 o'clock in the morning. But like, I always go on and watch the reactions. As I said before, they're so authentic, and I think it's the authenticity of it as well. The fact that it is your real reaction to what is going on or what has happened. They're incredible, guys. So go and make sure you check them out. Make sure you follow them as well. I'm sure that you've already do anyway, but I'm sure you don't want another. You've got 200 odd thousand followers, and throw some our way if you don't mind. But anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about what's coming up on our channel soon. So yes, on Friday we're sitting down. Oh no, Thursday. Sorry, we're sitting down with Joe Kazana to talk Joe Kazana Promotions and NWA. Friday we have probably one of the most interesting podcasts. The second time this man's appearing on the podcast, or we're recording with him on Friday, that'll be Vince Russo in an Ask Vince Anything. Barring Jim Cornette, we are not having that talk on this show.
Can I get in on that conversation?
You can. So Vince will be coming back on. Eric Bischoff, obviously, recording with him next week, so he'll be on, as well as a couple of weeks later, Layla, a former WWE Divas champion, Layla will be coming on, as will Epico : be coming on as well, because he's at the NWA tapings this weekend, and we are very fortunate to be in with the NWA. And just lastly, a big thank you to TNA for giving us Hammerstone interview last week. That has blown up a little bit. That was really nice ahead of Bound for Glory. Obviously, we're thankful for being one of the UK media partners of TNA, and download the TNA Plus app if you haven't done already. But Mr. Teshk, it has been incredible talking to you. Thank you so much for taking some time out of doing what you do best on these channels. I'll look forward to seeing you do more stuff as we head into Bad Blood this weekend. But thank you so much for taking your time of your day to come and talk to me. It was great to do a top 10 with you.
Cheers, mate. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully I can come back and we can shoot some more.
Oh, definitely. Without a doubt, we'll get you back on very, very soon indeed. But guys, this has been another top 10 review on the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. Until next time, everybody, buckle down, stay safe, and goodbye.